one county away from Kentucky. So I like to say there's a lot of things different between down there and up here. For example, when I played basketball as a kid, if I missed the backboard, I had a mile and a half walk down the hill to go get the basketball. So I'm sure whenever you guys missed the basketball, you guys just had a couple feet. But as you can see, I'm not in the NBA, so I wasn't good at basketball. I spent a lot of time running up and down hills, just like some of the goats that we raised. So grew up on a goat farm where we had up to 200 goats at one point in time. So we're going to be running really quick because I packed in a lot of stuff in this presentation and didn't realize how much time I needed. So we're going to talk about what is a healthy pasture, grazing versus overgrazing, the impact of soil fertility, and then carbon I cannot pronounce that word, sequestration. So looking at a pasture, is this a pasture we want to put our livestock out on? No. No, why? There's a bunch of wide open soil, and people see this as a problem. I like to see this as an opportunity. So we've got an opportunity to create what we want. It looks like it's an old row crop field. We see some old row crops in the back. But if we're trying to turn this into pasture, we can start determining what we want to do and how we want to make it, and then start looking towards if we want to do no-till or not. So the things that determine whether your pasture is healthy. So typically around probably next week is when I would start suggesting the people in Jackson County begin to start walking their pastures, because we're supposed to get a lot of rain this week or this weekend. And our temperature down there, we're supposed to hit 80s on Friday. So we're going to get to where the grass is going to start to jump start with that rain. So we're going to start seeing a lot of our pasture growth start to green up and start getting taller. So this is where we'd like to talk to our farmers to go out, scout your fields, and specifically look at percent of bare ground. So in Jackson County, we were affected by the drought situation where we had most of the county in D3, but the northern part of the county up in D4. So we experienced D4 drought. So that impacted a lot of our hay production. So a lot of our county, we had first cutting hay, and a lot of people, that was it. There's very few that actually had a lot of second cutting. So looking at our pastures, how's that going to impact our pastures moving into the next year? So going out, scouting your fields, seeing how much percent of your ground is going to be bare. If it's below 70%, this is where we're starting to recommend people that they might want to look at reseeding some options. Also looking at the desirable forage species and the weed concentration. So looking how much weeds are going to be in that pasture, what's going to be popping up, knowing what's going to be popping up, determining if they're how many we have and if they're poisonous. Plus erosion, so looking at if we have any active erosion that's starting to occur in that pasture, as well as that biological activity. So how long does it take to break down the livestock's manure? So first thing we always do, I'm sure everybody's heard this probably 1,000 times, don't guess, soil test. If you haven't had your pasture soil tested, it's always good to get a soil test to get the pH, NPK, see what percent of your organic matter is, and also your cation exchange capacity. So seeing whether it's going to be a sandy, silt, or clay, how well is your soil going to be able to hold on to those nutrients whenever they get those nutrients. And this is one that I just popped up here. This is one that my colleague Jordan Penrose made. So this is explaining the cost of those nutrients if you're going to bale hay. So this one's not really looking at pastures, looking at a hay field, but how much are those nutrients going to cost you per ton of hay? So from the current prices that he recorded from here, you're using about $17 just in nitrogen for a ton of hay. Or I think it's for actually thousand weight. No, it's by ton. Phosphate, if you look at phosphate, we're looking at $10. And if you look at your potash, looking at $16 to $17. So that's going for hay. We obviously know whenever we're doing hay, we're pulling it off. It's not going back. As we're grazing our pasture, our animals are going to go. They're going to drink the water, eat the feed, and then they're also going to process it and deliver some of it back. So we're not losing as much, but just recognizing what the value is for those nutrients whenever we put them on, and if we're going to be losing those nutrients. So knowing your grass. So typically in Jackson, Ohio, we typically have tall fescue. I'm assuming that's probably what most people have in their pastures, going to be a tall fescue, Kentucky bluegrass. Another grass that we can look at doing is orchard grass, which that's more in our hay fields. The reason it's more in our hay fields is because it needs to be babied just a little bit more. It can't be grazed over 4 inches because you're going to start having some effects to it. Same thing with Timothy. Timothy is commonly not in pasture. It's typically in your hay fields just because of how strong it's going to need. So Timothy, it needs a longer rest period after you have that traffic in it. So if you've got different types of pasture fields, different types of grasses, knowing that and trying to plan ahead about when you're going to be moving them through. Then legumes. So talking about legumes. So what type of legumes are we going to be having? So those clovers going into that pasture field. Clovers are going to add that nitrogen to it. So this can save you some money on fertilizer if you've got some clover in there, going to add that nitrogen to it. It's also going to add some diversity to your livestock rations. So I put this one in here. So this is talking about the typical chart of when our cool season grasses are going to be growing. So if we look at our cool season grasses, they're about to begin here in about this March range, and they're going to peak in May. So May is going to be typically the weather that's ideal for those cool season grasses to get their ideal growth. And then once the weather starts warming up in that July time, they're going to dip down, and then they're going to pop back up. So it's kind of a little roller coaster ride. If you go to Kings Island, Cedar Point up here, so seeing that little roller coaster ride and knowing the growth range that's going to be happening for our cool season forages. So looking at these charts, so these charts are showing at the top Kentucky bluegrass, and it's showing it as unimproved. So you just got Kentucky bluegrass in there. Second chart right over here is going to show Kentucky bluegrass and legumes. So whenever they added the legumes, those legumes added some nitrogen to that bluegrass and was able to give it that little spike it needed to increase its growth and yield. Same thing down here for our orchard grass, but instead of legumes, they put nitrogen in, and nitrogen gave it that bump. So adding more yield in your field by adding that nitrogen or those legumes. Same thing with this chart. It shows the orchard grass with legumes. It's very similar to the other one where you just added nitrogen to it. So how are we going to manage it? So rotational grazing. So trying to figure out how we're going to rotate our livestock from pasture to pasture to make sure we're not causing any negative effects to our field. So if we look at this triangle down here, let's say we just moved our livestock from this one to here because we started running out of vegetative growth, and then just rotating them through from field to field as they start eating that pasture field down. Another example right here, they probably were at 2 and they got moved to 1. 2 is getting some regrowth, but 3 is all the way grown. So we would move from 1 to 3 all the way down here to follow that green pasture. So we're going to talk about some different types of strategies whenever we're talking about rotational grazing. We're going to talk about deferred rotation. We're going to talk about rest rotation, short duration, and then seasonal suitability. So when we're talking about deferred rotation, this is one where we're talking about at least one pasture isn't grazed until it's set the seed. So if we look at our chart down here, a good example is if we started with this north pasture, we went ahead and put our livestock out in April and May. We moved them down to our south pasture from June and July, and then moved them over to our upland in August, September, October. We take that first field that we put them in on year 1, and year 2, this is going to be the last field we're going to put them in. So we're going to give this field a rest period. It's going to sit, and we're going to start in year 2 in the south field. Run through the south field, going through the upland field, and at the end of the year, they're going to hit this north field again. And then in year 3, this was your first year, we're going to give this one a rest period, and we're going to start off in the upland period, moving them through the north and then to the south. So kind of giving one field a rest period that's going to last for quite a bit just to give them that time to regenerate. So this can improve pastures, and it's occasionally not grazed when they're most sensitive to grazing, but it can reduce animal performance because you're not really chasing that green at that point. Rest rotation. So this one does have a big negative. It's kind of obvious. This is if you have 3 pasture fields, you set one to the side where you're not going to graze it for a whole year, giving it a whole year off to be able to have that rest period. Now, if this is one that you do, this is one where you're going to have to start looking at your livestock holding capacity. So how much livestock are you going to have? You want to make sure you might have less. You might have to get rid of some just because you have one whole pasture you're not even going to be using for that year. So this is one that comes with that negative, but it does give your pasture field that one chance to sit and have that rest period. And the short duration, just like it sounds, this is one kind of like a clock. So if you're looking at a clock, you're moving them quite a bit. This is one where you might be moving livestock every 10 to 15 days just from pasture to pasture. You're going to take a pasture field and make it even smaller. So you're going to give them small areas, keep them on it for a small amount of time, move them to the next one. So typically with our short duration, we're going to have our livestock on those fields twice a year. So this is one where you're going to have more forage or better forage quality because they're always chasing that green. They're following that green forage as they go. But the one issue with this one is there's really no rest period. Once they eat it down, it's got until they come back to rest, and then they've got something else on it. So following that rest period. This would be a good one if you've got an established pasture field and it's already has its root system established. It doesn't have small roots, where if there is a little bit of overgrazing, it might be able to rebound a lot better. This is also one that's going to increase your labor costs and also material costs because you're going to need more fencing material. You're going to need to divide up those fields just a little bit more, and it's just going to have an added cost to it. And then the seasonal suitability. So this is looking at having a winter range, a spring and fall range, and then a summer range. So this is one where you've got a winter range, which is going to consist of mainly your stockpiled forages. You're going to have your spring and fall range. Once it hits this April time, once those forages start to grow, you move them over to your spring/fall pasture. Once you hit the summer, they're going to move over to their summer pasture. And then once they eat their summer pasture down, you're going to move them back to the spring where it gives a little chance for regrowth. And then in the winter, they're back on that pasture field that's been stockpiled all growing season. So it's got all that growing dry matter where they can eat. So decisions and management. So any one of these decisions, they all work fairly well. It just depends on how much available forage you have, the amount of water you have, the different types of cover you have for calving or lambing, and then also if you've got facilities where you're going to be haying, so taking those into consideration on which one you're going to do. All systems are common. It just depends on who's going to be managing that system. So benefits. So benefits to grazing. So this is kind of taking benefits of grazing versus haying. So if you look at the cost, there's very minimal cost, except when you're talking about your feed, which is going to be your fertilizer and seed. I know a lot of people I talk to, they always say, well, I have a high feed cost in the wintertime, and then the summertime, I just turn them out on pasture. I like to try and change their mindset of, well, you've got that added feed cost. If you're buying hay, you're having that cost, but you also have that cost that you need to be doing of fertilizing and reseeding that pasture when it's needed. So having that cost in the mind saying, hey, this is just an added feed cost to my livestock that I need to take account for. If you have got marginal lands, so lands that have too much elevation or whatever it may be that you can't put crop production on, it's a good option for that. And then also environment. So as we're doing those grazing, as long as we don't overgraze it, we're going to have a pretty healthy grasslands that's going to have a good root system, and that root system can pull some carbon from the air, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So fencing, we won't touch on a whole lot about this, but determining whether you're going to have permanent fence. The permanent fence definition is a minimum of 20 years, or having those non-permanent fences. Also talking about electrified versus non-electrified, and it just all depends on what type of livestock you're planning to put into that pasture. This is one I like to put up there because if you're doing a temporary fence, this is one where you can look at if you've got a hillside, instead of doing it up and down, you do it side to side. Reason being, if you do it up and down, your livestock are climbing up and down the hill all day, and they're just going to start tearing up that whole forage system. So all that grass in there, they're going to start having more bare grounds, where if you've got a rain event, that rain event comes down and it can pull it all the way down. You're going to have an erosion problem pretty quick, where if you do side to side, you've got some cover on the top, you've got some cover on the ground, where they're naturally going to pick it up, and there's naturally going to be sediment, but there's something going to be able to catch that sediment. So we're going to be able to catch that sediment and reduce how much erosion we're actually going to be having. So steps to creating a plan. So forage plans can be created at any county NRCS program. They've also got cost share programs through EQIP, where they can help you with a cost share on fencing materials specifically for rotational grazing. Then overgrazing. So once we overgraze it, we're looking at where we're keeping our animals on there too long. They're eating that vegetation down really low. We're not giving any rest periods, And essentially it's going to kill off those grasses, have these little spots in the soil where they're just going to be exposed, and it's going to have an added cost of trying to renovate that pasture. It can also create desertification, which is taking once fertile land and turning it into those non-fertile desert areas. So this is what it can look like. So on a worldwide scale, we're looking at around 20,000 square miles every year being turned in from fertile land to desertification just from overgrazing. So from these, it can increase that stirring winds, moving sediment through the wind. It can also increase the intensity of forest fires. So here's some costs to consider whenever we're talking about renovating that pasture. So we have a lot that goes into renovating a pasture. If you were to overgraze, if you grazed it too much, here are some considerations on what it's going to cost us to turn that pasture back in, or that field back into a healthy pasture. So if you look at your fertilizer and lime recommendations, depending on the field, this can range anywhere from 40 upwards to even higher than $100 an acre. Seed cost, what are we going to put down? Is there a specific seed we're going to put down? Pesticides, if we've taken too much grazing and there's too much bare spots and we've got a weed problem now, how are we going to manage those weeds? Is that going to be more mechanical stuff that we're going to do, whether that's taking the tractor out, mowing more often, or whether that's actually buying the herbicides and actually spraying the herbicides? And then also that equipment cost that comes into doing all that stuff above. So how do we know when to rotate pastures? So looking at this one, on this right side, I would say this one's about where we want it. We want to go ahead and move our livestock to the field over to the left. Over here, what do you guys think on this one? Yeah, this is pastime. If this isn't just a sacrificed area, this is definitely a spot where there's a lot of open ground. You can see quite a bit of compaction that's going to be right here where they're walking. So yeah, this is one you definitely want to switch out. What about this one? It's kind of hard to tell just by looking at it, but I would say this one's still pretty good. But we can have a way of actually saying whether it's good or not. And then this one, obviously, we've got grass pretty much high on both sides. So when we're looking at a healthy pasture has tall, good forages. As tall as they are, they're going to have that root system. That root system is going to be very important when we're talking about water. Water with those root systems, it'll follow that root system down, go into the soil. And without that water in the soil, those nutrients are not transferring to that plant. So having that root system is really important. As to overgrazing, if you overgraze it, the root systems can be smaller, and it's going to have an issue where the water's not going down, getting as much nutrients as it needs. But you're also running into the issue where the water isn't going into the ground. So it's going to cause some erosion issues. So instead of going down through the soil, it's going to sit on top and it can flow off, especially where I'm at, where we've got a lot of hills. So we're going to see a lot of erosion if we've got very short roots within our pasture. So I've got these, and I'm going to pass these around after I throw the clicker on the ground. So these are called grazing sticks. So this is a really good tool to have if you plan on grazing. So on our grazing stick, it's going to show us when we want to graze. So it's got a period that says graze during this height. That's typically what you want to do. You just want to stick it in the ground, look and see where it's at. If it says to graze, if it's as high as it says to graze, you're good. It's also got a way to estimate how much dry matter you have. So you see these dots on this side? So these dots are there for a purpose. You take it and you just set it into the ground and you just stand here and you count and see how many dots you can see. You want as many of these dots covered as you can. So if you look over here, it says how many different types of dots you can see per pounds of different types of grasses. It has orchard grass, bluegrass, perennial rye, and tall fescue that it can give you an estimate for. So these are a really cool tool just to take out with you, especially if something comes at you, you got like a little karate tool to beat them off with. So it's also talking about how flexible your system is. So this year, it really stressed farmers' systems in our area. We experienced that drought. So when is your area going to experience those droughts? Whether it's flooding, are we going to have that flooding that's going to impact our pasture? So looking at how flexible is our system if we have that event. And then once we look at how flexible it is, we want to see what our carrying capacity or livestock units are for our specific pasture. So this is for your average pasture. It's going to be healthy. So if you've got a healthy pasture, if you've got a new pasture, you can kind of look at these numbers and kind of get a good estimate of how much livestock I should be running on this pasture. So these are animal units, and animal units, they're based to feed 1,000 pounds of animal weight for 30 days. So can give you a good estimate of whether you've got too much livestock on pasture or if you've got room where you can add some more. But also, again, looking at what if we have that issue in the future? How flexible can your pasture be if we have a time of crisis? So I can't pronounce words, guys. I'm sorry. We didn't learn how to read. Agrivoltaic, still can't say it. So this is talking about grazing livestock underneath solar panels. So whether you have an opinion on solar panels or not, this is one they're starting to do some research on just to see if it's possible. So there's research being done out of Madison County with OSU Extension to see if they can establish some forages underneath those solar panels to see if they can graze them. So they're looking at just the livestock for sheep, just because sheep are going to be less destructive. I've raised goats. They can break anything they want. So they're looking at sheep to see whether they can graze throughout them. And they've had their first year was just this year. They faced a lot of difficulties during this trial. This is in our eFields program for extension. If you're interested, eFields is a good book to read. But what they found just this year wasn't much information to really come to a conclusion, just because in the spring they had a lot of water, they had too much water. And then in the summertime, they had the issue where they hit that drought range. They didn't have enough water. So they had too much and then not enough. So they're doing a study that's going to last until 2027. So they're going to be monitoring the situation to see if they can grow forages and then what type of quality those forages are going to be. So benefits to the environment. So talking about that carbon dioxide turning into organic carbon. So essentially we're looking at that CO2 in the air coming down to those plants. So for this example, this would be in that tree, going into that tree through photosynthesis. Some of it goes down into the soil as soil carbon, but then the others get released through plant respiration back to the air. So when we look at our grasses, what they're essentially doing is they're going down, collecting that carbon dioxide from the air, turning it into food, pushing it down to their roots. That organic material loves that carbon, so that it thrives on that carbon, and then it also releases some back through respiration. So whenever we have that, we're going to increase, we're not just taking that carbon from the soil or from the air to the soil, we're also increasing the amount of organic matter that we may have for our live organisms to feed off of. So this is a study that they did. I believe it's out of Georgia, down in southern United States, where they took an old crop field and they wanted to revitalize it just to see how much carbon it can start to collect. So it's old crop field, it sat there, and this is what it looked like after 7 years. So there's definitely some noticeable differences. On here, it's all brown. Over here, we got some green growth into it. And they found that the water capacity was able to hold 30% more water than it did in the past, because of those roots going in, being able to hold that water moisture into the soil. And they also started monitoring how much carbon was being taken up. So when you look at the carbon, they had a lag phase of between 0 to 2 years. But after that 2-year mark, from converting it from an old crop land to that pasture area, they started to see that they were accumulating more at a linear pace of carbon coming from there. So they were able to pull that carbon. With that carbon coming out of the atmosphere, going into the soil, it's also increasing that organic matter. So that organic matter being in the soil, being able to make your soil more fertile. So in summary, rotational grazing, process of planned grazing that encourages pasture growth, using no-till whenever you're talking about renovating pasture, shortening the periods that plants are exposed to grazing, reducing the number of animals on land if you have too many on your land, and then reducing tillage brings in that stronger root system that's going to be able to hold more water.